To be honest, I've struggled a bit putting together notes for this episode. And you'd think that the solo episodes would be the easy ones, right? It's just sitting and talking. But I find them way harder than the interviews. And I had a laundry list of episode ideas of things I could do solo sodes about right now. None of them feel relevant or real for me talking to you right now with everything in the world. And this topic does. Back in 2018, the 12-year marriage that I was in ended. And in that moment of transition, I found myself genuinely afraid. We had been together since we were 20. We had been married since we were 21. And I genuinely doubted my own ability to do it, whatever it is, on my own. And if I try to put a label on what it is, it's living life, paying bills, making it work in New York City, because that's where I was living at the time, as a personal trainer, because that's all I was. Not that is limited, but it is limited in its income potential. And if it had longevity for me. And I doubted it. And since I had been in my probably mid-adolescence, I was going to say since I was young, the thought of having to move home would have meant that I failed at all the things I wanted to do in life, which is very different. If you've regularly listened to the show, you'll know that I bought a house in my hometown and moved there earlier this year. I spent the rest of 2018 just first getting right with myself, healing from the end of that marriage, and also figuring out the systems that I would need in order to be able to ride it out. And much of that journey, much of that time in my life has led me to where I am right now. Part of that moment was getting organized, really deeply organized so that I could be highly productive, making sure I could make enough money, which was part of that organization and productivity, building out my long-term plans, the strategies to get there, all of those things that I put the infrastructure into 3 years ago have come to bear now. So the adage about that the people who seem suddenly successful have actually been grinding, however long they've been grinding. I'm sure there's a good adage in there that I can't come up with the words for right now. I'm living the payoff of that right now. But this is capitalized in my notes. What I'm finding is that the thinking that got me here isn't necessarily the thinking that is going to bring me forward to the next moment of success and gratitude and accomplishment and meaning and purpose that I want in my life. That way of being was necessary to make the transition to where I am now. I was genuinely concerned for my ability to survive in a modern capitalistic world on my own. My former partner had tenure. He was part of a very strong union. We had everything we needed, but much of it came from him. And I wasn't sure that I could do that. I also really didn't know what a good life looked like after that transition. I just knew that I had to do it. I knew that it was the right choice. So the early part of that big transition, if I look back to 3 years ago, was spent figuring it out. And when I read my journals from that time, almost all of those big boxes are checked. So I started with casting, first I started with the grief of ending a marriage and letting myself feel all those feelings and what was underneath the choices I made and what was underneath those choices and how did I get there and what did I want to be different. My current man person refers to that as me rebooting the operating system. We were friends then. And I'd had this operating system of over a decade with one person. And all the lessons you learn in your 20s being with him. Now I had a new OS to build for myself. And so I did that. I cast a new vision into the world. I set related goals. I hustled and it worked. But with that hustle, with that grind, is a lot of nights of not sleeping well, a lot of days of not eating well, a lot of internal stress, of internalized negative thoughts and fear. And it feels like now we're living in a very different world than I was in 2018. Now the fears feel outside instead of inside. And one of my very favorite Einstein quotes, this is one of my favorite quotes ever. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that we used to create them. But I think that quote lacks, in my mind, one major detail. And I see clients who struggle with this too. They beat themselves up because of some behavior, some belief that they've been carrying around that they know they don't want. But that old thinking, that old way of being, was necessary to solve the old problems. Very often the patterns that we are carrying come from a reaction to something that we used to be dealing with, and we didn't find a way to let it go and find a new equilibrium. And that's the moment that I'm in right now. My way of being in the last 3 years has been a lot of stress, a lot of hustle, grad school, establishing my own business while still in grad school, in a pandemic, with major social upheaval, the mistakes that I made, the way I coped with my stress. I needed those things. I needed those coping mechanisms to get through that moment, to get to where I am now. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I want to carry that disequilibrium, that lack of balance in myself. I don't mean like work-life balance and burnout. I mean like, am I waking up from a nightmare when there's no threat? So I think I want a different way forward, and that means new thinking. And I want to be clear about a big point here. In my micro world, there's nothing actually wrong. And I'm not saying that like I don't have problems to solve, I don't have issues. I'm saying that like I have what I need from all of the effort of the last 3 years. And that's like COVID notwithstanding. There is a lot right, and I am deeply grateful for it. The systems and structures I had in place were reactions to what wasn't working in the previous iteration of myself. And those systems and structures got me to here. And I'm not saying this as like some weird, humble, braggy influencer, blah, blah, blah. I'm saying this as, hey, it's okay to be okay. And we need for some of us to be okay if we're going to help other people get through what's going on in the world. If we are all suffering and struggling, then there's no one available to reach down and pull one another up. So where my head is right now is in that place. That it's got to be okay for me to be okay and not internalize the challenges in the world when my bubble is okay right now. Because I can't help anyone who's struggling if I'm not okay. I can't, help the person who's drowning if I don't have a ship that's right myself. So what does that mean in terms of tangible practice? Where am I at in my own toolkit? Well, first, it's been taking the time and energy for restorative work, not as a reaction, which is what it was in 2018, 2019, 2020, but to be proactive. One of the biggest lessons I learned in 2018, I had gone to Thailand to study yoga with Tal Suisa of Luna Alignment Yoga. It was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. And one of the things I learned there was that I had a different possible baseline to move through the world than I'd ever experienced before. I think even in childhood, this level of reduced tension and openness and creativity and freedom. I thought that I had to be reactive, that when I felt stressed, I had to work to get back to that place. And now I want to be building practices that keep me there whenever I'm not in flux or working to bring something into the world. That what if that's my baseline? How different might that be? So that's meant shifting my meditation practices, my fitness, my nutrition, even my supplementation, my food timing. It's actually why I plugged Vessel at the beginning of this episode. It's why I ended up investing in Vessel. And the nutrition example is actually a really good example of the mindset shift I'm talking about here. I very much had this, okay, I got to eat in a certain way to change my body composition so I can look like a trainer. And if I eat badly, then I'm going to be reactive to get myself back on track. And now, what do I need to do to give my body its nourishment? So I'm not fasting the way I used to. Right? I take a daily fast between dinner and breakfast. But at the time, I was doing some pretty extreme fasting to get into and keep in ketosis, believing it was somehow going to like detoxify my existence or whatever. No. And I think a lot about nourishment these days. What nourishes my body? What helps it restore and brings it to new equilibrium? That's a big shift. How do I create restorative work, not only in my gut, in my food, also in my central nervous system? That's where the meditation practices come in. Another big category where I'm creating this for myself is in my goal setting and my striving. Because I realized that a lot of my goal setting at that time and in the last few years has been around fear of failure, around obligation, shoulding, these externalized ideas of success, that I was setting goals because that's the places in my life that I'd been told I needed to set goals. And you got to have goals because goals is part of success. And so much of being a trainer is around goal setting, goal, and smart goals and the right goals. And feels like a lot of pressure right now, as opposed to pulling back for a moment in this bubble of pause I'm experiencing and being proactive. It's a bit of a woo-woo thought, but a new round of vision casting for myself into potential futures, hunting for my direction, for me personally, for my community, for my family. What is possible and what is interesting? And how do I go there? Instead of what's that entrepreneurial blogger say that I should be setting goals around? And another big area that this is showing up in, it's showing up in a lot of different ways, but the big one is around my personal organizational structure. And if you had had a peek into my life in the last 15 years, you would see that I lived for busyness. I had a very deep investment in the system getting things done. And that is a lot of lists and list making and folders and routine practices meant to keep you at peak productivity. And I want to replace that illusion of control with directional, meaningful work. Because that hyper productivity focus to me now feels so overstructured, so much like a 20th century tool that is so overly constrictive. When in actuality, what I need is the container to move, to make, and do in ways that align, that aren't just about what projects are you doing and what are you going to bill and blah, 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 blah. Like, what are the cool ideas that are going to help people that feel true to me? This is a very different paradigm in existence than what I was raised in as, like, the Hermione Granger of my high school, always sitting in front with my hand waggling. How I got through college, how I was successful in my 20s and my early 30s, and ultimately what built the thing I'm in right now. But golden handcuffs, it's creating a new problem where the creativity doesn't always flow and the central nervous system feels a bit overstimulated at the end of the day. I'm not ending my day always feeling this strong sense of achievement and alignment. I'm often ending my day just worried that I didn't get enough done, which what's enough then comes up for me. So that's a peek behind the curtain of the current internal transformation, because so much of the externals have got us where I want to be and in a good position to do meaningful work and to truly help people. I would love to hear. Send me a DM, send me an email, info@darlene.coach. I want to hear how you manage these transitions in yourself. How do you put the emotional weight down when you have arrived at a place you have been striving to be? And what are the tools that we can be sharing amongst one another that got you there?